Hello, my name is Joseph Carroll. Welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about my top 5 favorite book series of all time. Now, let's preface this by saying this is just my list, my favorites. You know, everyone has their own opinions. I would love to see what your top 5 would be in the comments. Maybe after we get through this list, you can leave me some suggestions of what you think I might like. And I'm going to kind of keep these short and to the point as much as possible. And maybe in future videos, we can go through the series or through individual books in the series and make those their own video. So I will try to keep these non-spoiler as possible as well. So without further ado, we'll go to number 5, which is Malazan Book of the Fallen. Now I am through 3 books. I was into the 4th one, and then one of my friends from Steve Talks Books started up a read along. So I have went back through, and we've already done videos on his channel for Gardens of the Moon and Dead House Gates. And I think it'll be about another 2 months, and we'll do Memories of Ice, and then I'll be caught up. But this book series, what makes it so great is the massive scope of everything. You get hundreds, it seems like hundreds of different POVs through these books. And they are chunkers. I mean, I think the first one was 700 pages, something like that. And then the rest of them are, around or north of 1,000 pages. But his world building is next level. I don't think anyone, I mean, maybe, Jordan Willow from the Wheel of Time, maybe could match the world building, but it's massive. And he has a background in archaeology, and you can just tell from these books, you get beautiful descriptions of the land. When they go into tombs, you can tell that he spares no expense on the details that he writes, and his prose are at the very top of the list. Um, I mean, you could definitely say there's a few people out there that match his prose, but I mean, it would be hard to say that someone writes significantly better prose than Steven Erikson. And one thing I think in these books, because it would be hard to spoil these books because, I mean, especially when you start off, they confuse you, or they confuse me a lot. But one thing I think gets overlooked, and this is his humor. He writes great maniacal characters, and the humor that he has within these books is excellent. So right now, it sits at number 5. Now, number 4 is another big one on Booktube, and that is The Dark Tower. I have finished The Dark Tower, and actually have gone back through a few of the books because I'm doing a discussion that started off with Steve, and then we have went through a couple of different people, and the final one may be on my channel. I'm not sure, but it's Stephen King's Dark Tower is a little bit of everything. You start off with a fantasy western, then you go into portal fantasy, and then that western aspect always flows through, but it's hard to nail down. And I think there were so many influences that Stephen King used. He used his own personal influences, and then he's used pop culture and other writers throughout the whole series to kind of build his Magnus Opus. A lot of people think that this is where all his books tie in through the multiverse of Stephen King. But uh, I I just have so much praise for this book, and I might be one of the weird people who thinks that the first book is the best. And maybe I'm just a sucker for short books that punch real hard, because the book's only like 200 pages or so. But uh, you know, Stephen King likes to go off on tangents, and they kind of build up the size of his books, and the books progressively get larger throughout the series. But I still, love the first book, and I'm not as hard on the ending as some people are. I mean, I have my problems, with certain ways he decided to go with it, but I would never dissuade anyone from starting The Dark Tower. Uh, Especially if you're ready for a more, serious type fantasy book, because, this book has, drug addiction, you know, sex addiction. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in it, and I think Stephen King, as he was going through these things himself, kind of put those into the book. But it is one of my all-time favorites. The Gunslinger is still my favorite book in the series, but I think they get grander and grander. And again, if you've heard bad things about the ending, um, I wouldn't take that to pull you out of starting this series. Um, I've told everybody I know that reads fantasy that this is one, if you haven't, get into it. Um, they're excellent reads. Not for everybody. Like I said, if you're not a big fan of Stephen King's writing style, then this is probably not going to be for you. But excellent book. And book number three, the book series here is the only sci fi series on the list, and that is Expeditionary Force, by Craig Allenson. And this series, I want to say there's like 13 books in this series, and he's pretty close. He's pretty close to ending it. He might have one or two more books. But this series, I didn't think I was gonna like it when it started off, but it was sold to me as kind of a Dresden in space, um, and it definitely lived up to the hype for me. Uh, these aliens. You start off with this just normal everyday soldier, and these aliens come down and start wrecking the planet, and he, is kind of that man that stumbles through the world, kind of like a Forrest Gump, but all his faculties are there. He just happens to get lucky, um, over and over again, until further down through the series he becomes that person that people thought he was in the beginning. Um, but Allenson is an amazing writer, and I think what he may do better than anybody else is he can write a conversation that you can just the conversations that he has pull you in. I mean, the plots of the books are really good, and you can tell he's thought these out. But the strongest suit is I can just read or listen to the audiobooks are amazing. RC Bray does the audiobooks, and just listen to the conversations that people have. Um, they're they're funny, but he can also write serious emotional things. Um, but this book is so accessible to anybody. Um, they don't use too many terms that you wouldn't understand, and even when he does do technical terms, and puts in space, futuristic terms, you still understand what they're talking about. And the main character, Joe Bishop, basically the other main character is an artificial intelligence, and their banter is maybe the best in all all of sci-fi fantasy. I mean, just the way they go back and forth and the way Allison is able to, show you the intelligence of this AI. Um, Coming from an author's point of view, I mean, it's just terrific. I don't think that I could write sci-fi, especially not the way that he does. You can tell he really knows what he's talking about, and his humor is second to none. Uh, Now we're getting up here to the big boys. So, number two for my second favorite series of all time is the Witcher series by Andrei Selkovsky. Now, I've went through these books twice, and actually the way I got into them is my wife got me The Witcher 3. And my friend had been telling me to read the books for years and telling me that the games are great. So he told me that the games are basically a successor, a sequel to the books. So as soon as I got the game, I sat it off to the side and I said, I'm gonna go through the books first, so nothing's ruined for me. And I mean, it was just, Geralt, Dandelion or Jaskier as he's known in the show. Just so many great characters. Sapkowski's character work is second to none. I mean, just the way he can make you care about these characters. Now, a lot of people you know seem to like the first two books. Because there are a group of short stories and a kind of like adventures, like, oh, this adventure to that adventure. But he does kind of go away from Geralt a little bit towards the end. The second to last book, I want to say it's like the sixth book. And a lot of people like really just get tired of not being in the Witcher's point of view. But I really enjoyed it, especially when you're with Ciri. Um, I thought her point of view was amazing. And he writes, you're in that medieval style, and he writes about how humans are just as big of monsters as these monsters that Geralt is supposed to be slaying, and it really kind of opens your eyes. And there are some people have said there's maybe a little bit of sexism through The Witcher, but I mean I didn't see that too much, especially with Yennefer and Triss and having so many strong female characters in the book. But I could see how maybe this book isn't for everybody, but the just the story and how Geralt and Ciri form this bond that is so strong, and you feel that bond, especially once you get to Lady of the Lake, the last book. And I mean, to me, the ending of the series you know was great. Some people, again, this happens to a lot of series, that especially the longer ones. You know, some people weren't a fan of it, but I loved how how emotional um, the ending hit for The Witcher. And then of course then I went into the games, and which were, I mean, I probably put over 200 hours into The Witcher 3, but it made me you know love the whole, like, almost like ecosystem of The Witcher even more. And I've went back into The Witcher multiple occasions and reread the books, um, and they just never get old. Now here we are, final spot, numero uno. And if you've seen me do interviews with other people or discussions, you'll undoubtedly know what number one is. And that is The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. This was another book series that my friend got me into, my best friend, and he pushed it on me for a long time. And just finally one day I was like, okay, all right, well, he said, give it 3 books. They're short books. You'll be able to get through them. And honestly, the first book, it was just okay enough to keep me interested. Then the second book, he was telling me, the fandom, says that the second book, Full Moon, you know, isn't that great. But actually, that's the one that really got me going into it and wanting to know more. Because the way he does werewolves in the second book, and I actually will say that I believe that the second book is a horror novel. Just the way that he writes it, and there's certain scenes I won't give away, but they are brutal. Some of the darker scenes that you'll ever see. Now the series is 17 books long, and has several short stories. Probably, I mean, if you put them all together, they're probably 20 books worth. Um, but I normally tell people once you get through book 3, you'll never turn back, because so many arcs and stuff happen in Grave Peril, which is book 3, that these arcs, no one throws up arcs like Jim Butcher. I mean, so many things. Certain ones haven't even dropped yet, and we're what 14 books past book 3. But you just get so invested in Harry, because to me he is the perfect type of hero inside a fantasy world. He is nowhere near perfect, and especially when you start off, he's not that strong, and his first person's perspective just makes this book. I mean, you wouldn't have this book be the same if it was in a different perspective, because you get to be in Harry's head and see how flawed he is, but how much he cares uh, for his friends, his family, his loved ones. Um, and a lot of times he makes the wrong moves. He makes mistakes, and we've all been there. So we can look at ourselves and be like, yeah, I've done that too. Um, but he never stops fighting, and some of the stuff that he goes through, you just get to know the character so well, and you hurt for him. You hurt for him when certain things happen to him or to the ones he loves. Nobody, nobody in this series is safe. You know, um, of course, Harry is the main character, so there's plot armor there, but everybody else is fair game. And Jim Butcher's even said that. He's like, don't get overly attached to a lot of these people, but then he laughs about it because he knows he has made you attached to all these characters. So when one does die or go away or whatever, you hurt. And especially if you do audiobooks, James Marsters is one of the best audiobook narrators ever. And you know, when he's telling you the story as Harry, it's almost like I've went back through the series 4 times, and it's like listening to an old friend, tell you, what the worst week of their year was. That's kind of how these books go. They're kind of the worst week of Harry's year. Most of them, all the way up through like book 13 or 14. Um, but this series, and people have said it before, and I love. I've been following Sarah from Sarah Reads. I've been following her journey through Dresden, and just all the hype always I've never seen somebody make it through and the hype not live up to it. And just her reaction to some of the books has just been like, as the biggest Dresden fan, I'm like, yes, yes, I love it. I love seeing people and say, oh yeah, when I get to this book, it's gonna be life changing. That's what everybody says. And then when they get when they get there, they're just like, what'd you do to me, Jim? you know. And then the other thing that I love seeing live up to the hype for these people is, it starts off so small and they're like, oh, I've read The Wheel of Time, or I've read this book and that book. And they're like, oh, these are small, like noir type stories. But then the world just builds and builds and builds and builds till now where we're at. There's no way you couldn't say that it's not epic fantasy. It's urban epic fantasy. Um, and I, you know, I think he released two books in 2020 after a 5 year hiatus. So I'm hoping, crossing our fingers, next year we might get book 18. But Jim Butcher and Selkovsky have had such an impact on my writing, especially with my first book. I've had people say it's kind of like it's like a mixture of The Witcher world-wise, and then the main character Simon is a little bit like Harry Dresden. Uh, but you know, it's hard. You never want to copy anybody's writing style, but of course, you're gonna find your mixtures of what you love to read is gonna be in there. But it's just a fantastic series, and um, I will say I can't wait to get into more series. I'm doing the read along with Malazan, so I'm continuing that. Um, and I'm into the Sandman Slim series. Um, Trying to get into the Iron Druid series. There's a lot of stuff. So um, if you could, like, subscribe, and leave a comment on what's your top five. What do you think of what I've said? What would be some books you think I would really like? And I will try and throw those on my TBR. And, I may revisit this episode or this video maybe 6 months from now, maybe a year from now, and we'll see. Maybe I'll do a top 10 and we'll see if any shuffling has happened. But I appreciate all you for watching, and I'll see you soon.